Minister, I see here that there's a policy to increase the maximum sentences available for offences related to child sexual abuse. But as you know, part of the issue that many people are concerned about here is that it's getting nowhere near the maximum sentence as is. There's very often that we see people getting caught with very depraved child sex abuse imagery, for example, and then being let off with a fully suspended sentence. This sort of thing happens on a near constant basis as people say as they're following courts news. So what would you do specifically about that problem, if anything?
Firstly, I think it should always be the case that the sentence matches the crime, and what I've seen in my time in the department is that so often the maximum sentence does not essentially match the crime. That's why I increased, in particular, assault causing harm from 5 to 10 years. I saw a particular case where a young woman who was pregnant had boiling water with sugar thrown over her by her partner, and because the maximum sentence was only 5 years, once you take mitigating factors into account, it resulted in a very minimal sentence as far as I'm concerned. So my objective has always been to make sure that our judiciary are provided with the ability or the capacity to apply a higher sentence if necessary, taking into account all of the various different factors potentially in a case. That's no different here to child sexual abuse, and I think we need to look at what is probably one of the most awful crimes that can be committed in our society, preying on some of the most vulnerable people in our society, that we ensure that there is that flexibility and that capacity for our judiciary to acknowledge that. Coupled with that, I think it's important that we see judicial guidelines as soon as possible. And so what we're proposing here, while the Judicial Council have done excellent work in a number of areas over the last number of years, what we're proposing is an ability for ministerial direction to put in place specific guidelines on particular types of sentencing, something that doesn't exist at the moment. And this is an area that I feel would need to be prioritised in one of the first instances. So
do you think it's conceivable then that we will continue to see, should you be re-elected in the upcoming election and become the Justice Minister again, that we would continue to see instances of people being given fully suspended sentences despite being caught with heinous child sex abuse imagery or committing other crimes of that nature? Is that something that we're going to continue to see into the next government term if you're in office?
You'll appreciate there's a very clear separation of powers, so there's no ability for any minister to decide what a particular sentence is in any given case. However, it's my job and it's any minister's job to make sure that there is that flexibility, that there is that ability to provide sentences that match the crime and punishments that match the crime, and so allowing for an increase in ceilings is one thing, but also making sure.
But I'm sorry, Minister, but I just have to ask, because as I say, currently many judges aren't getting anywhere near the ceilings that exist now. So it doesn't matter. I would imagine if the sentence is 100 years, if that's the maximum sentence, but judges are giving out suspended sentences, then what good is that going to do? How is that going to improve the situation?
I think there are a number of things here that we need to ensure. We need to ensure that sentences match the crime and that ability is there. We are proposing also that we would have specialist judges specifically related to domestic, sexual and gender-based violence, that there would be continuous training for our judiciary in that regard, that we would be able to introduce in a much quicker way judicial guidelines. And as I've said, I think this is an area that needs to be prioritised, but also making sure that Gardaí have the ability to gather as much evidence and to do their job as effectively as possible in combating child sexual abuse. I've been doing a huge amount of work with our Commissioner at a European level to make sure that Gardaí have the resources and the capacity to be able to deal with so much of what is happening now online in relation to child sexual abuse. And as we know,
But I'm very sorry. That's a separate issue, though. I mean, we're talking about cases where people are caught with.
And obviously, it's not for a minister to decide what a sentence is, but what I can do is make sure that all of the structures and resources are in place to be able to respond to what is one of the most awful crimes that can be committed against any person.
I think it's important
to
understand how sentencing works. So the range that's available to the judge is to determine the sentence of where that is. So, for example, if your maximum sentence is 5 years and the judge judges the sentence to be or the offence to be in the mid-range, then the range is 2 to 3 years. But if the maximum is 10 years, the mid-range sentence should be 4 to 6. So the purpose of increasing the sentence is to give the judge greater leniency in deciding, or greater accommodation in deciding where on the scale that lands. So actually increasing the sentence does increase the sentence and sends a message from the Oireachtas in an appropriate way that this is a matter that should be marked in a particular way.
Okay, Sean, Davis.